So I've shot about 1,000 rounds, 1,100 rounds through my Tisas B45R so far, and so I wanted to use this video to give my initial thoughts on, how is the pistol doing? What do I think? And so if you're anything like me, you were a little curious when you heard of the Tisas name. The 1911 is a uniquely American gun. So when you hear about a foreign company making 1911s at a kind of, entry-level price point, and the initial reviews being good, although limited, you're kind of curious to know more about it. Maybe a little skeptical, but you want to understand, is it too good to be true, or is it something that, is worth picking up? And so I went for it, and so far I've been quite pleased. So in this, I'll just share my opinions on, how I think the pistol is doing. Keep in mind, I'm not too familiar with 1911s as I am with AR-15s. I only have one other 1911 that only had 1,000 rounds through it, so my frame of reference is a little more limited, so just kind of keep that in mind. So before we get into the actual review itself, I really want to devote just a few seconds to talk about 1,000 round reviews and how I suggest that you look at this video and any video after 1,000 rounds. So to me, with 1,000 rounds, they're like informed initial impressions videos. They're better than unboxing videos where you don't shoot them, but it's nothing like shooting 5,000 rounds through your gun to really have the ability to judge a gun's longevity. So after 1,000 rounds, I think you'll probably, you're more familiar with the gun, you kind of know how the trigger feels, and you've kind of worked out some of the kinks. And unless it's like a completely crappy lemon product, you only have so much information and so much trigger time to fully understand how good the gun is, in my opinion. So whether I say things that are good or bad about the gun, keep in mind it's only been 1,000 rounds, which is not that many if you think about it. So overall, what do I think about the gun? Just to summarize the video, I would say I recommend it so far. Again, I'll keep hammering home it's only been 1,000 rounds, but from what I've shot so far, I like it and it's been very enjoyable. And while I'm still getting used to shooting the 1911 and the 45 caliber, I look forward to continuing to shoot the gun to kind of learn about it more, to understand how it works, and to, hopefully one day put into a concealed carry rotation. With that being said, I will say that despite the incredibly attractive price point of $550 and the good quality for that price point, I've had about 10 out of the 1,000 rounds or 1,100 rounds where I have had some cycling issues. I honestly think that might be my cleaning schedule or lack thereof, but we'll talk about that more soon. But overall, it's been good so far. I'll also give you a little bit of background just briefly on this specific pistol. And so I purchased this in May of 2022, and I had basically been looking for a full-size government profile 1911 and 45. I do have a Colt M45A1, which I love, but for me, I've always just kind of seen it as more of a collector's piece because of the growing rarity these days. And so I wanted to purchase a gun that I could kind of, use and abuse, right? And so this Tisas I thought was really good. And if you're anything like me, you've probably only heard of Tisas more recently. And basically, they have been giving what are, so far, very good quality 1911s at very accessible price points. And so they've gained a lot more visibility in the American market because of that. And now they're starting to come out with the 1911 double stack models in 9mm too at a much more affordable $800 price points than your Springfield Prodigy or your 2011s that are $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000. So now let's talk about the performance and accuracy of this gun. So do your shots land where you want them to go, and how does the gun perform on the range? And so, as it comes to, as no surprise, I think a lot of accuracy and, that kind of, rounds down range has a lot to do with the shooter. And I think this gun is no exception. As I mentioned, I am still learning the 1911 platform, recoil and just ergonomics overall and, handling it. And so I find that if I am just shooting, under the most ideal conditions, 3 to 5 yards, 1 shot a second, my shots go exactly where I want them to. And for a pistol, the groups are, they're excellent. So it's right on target. Now, when I start to do more complex drills or, things like build drills or things that require me to have a better grasp of recoil management, which is currently something I'm lacking on this gun, then of course my groups open up a lot. So this is why I really think the accuracy is good, but it's just me as the shooter not being familiar with the 1911 or the 45 caliber. So as you can see from some of this footage here, I blink or flinch, a noticeable amount when I'm shooting the 45 because I'm just not used to the recoil coming from the 9mm. But with all of this being said, as for the pistol specifically itself, it's been great in terms of performance and accuracy. I will say ergonomics are also very good for the 1911. First, its design makes it very comfortable to shoot, but also when I put VZ grips on here, They are far more aggressive and tactile than the stock plastic smooth grips that came with the Tisas, and I think that helps me a lot too with controlling and being able to grip the gun better. One thing I'm also noticing too is that because this B45R is larger than my Glock 17, I'm still figuring out in terms of reloading whether I prefer to use the slingshot method or the slide stop. The slide stop is a little harder to reach on the B45R, and so I end up shifting my grip if I use that versus the slingshot, so it's just another thing for me to get used to. I'll also say that too, for the triggers, it seems to be in line with everything you hear about 1911s, far better and more crisp than a Glock trigger. So then this B45R has a very, small amount of trigger creep before you hit the wall, and when you do actually pull the trigger, the break is quite crisp. Now, the trigger itself does have a little bit of play as it sits on, into the frame of the pistol, but it's really nothing that actually has any kind of, functional implications. It's just more that I notice when I field strip the gun or something, I notice there's a little bit of play back and forth, up and down. That's more just, like a fitment thing. It doesn't actually make my trigger finger slip or anything like that, but it's just something to note too. So overall, I'd say if you know what you're doing with 1911s or just shooting handguns or 45, you'll be fine. I think it's a very adequate gun in that way. So we talked about performance and accuracy. So let's talk about the reliability and durability of this gun. How has it held up so far after 1100 rounds? So first, for some reference in terms of a cleaning schedule for the 1911, because I know it has to be cleaned more than, newer guns. Every 200 rounds, I'll field strip this gun and clean it down, re-lube it. But I've only done a deep cleaning and complete disassembly after the 1100th round or so very recently. So with that in mind, I have noticed that of the 1100 rounds, in the first 50 rounds, I had 3, malfunctions where either would, I think 2 failures to eject and once where it got caught in the disconnector. It was something like that. From a 50 to 1,000 rounds, no problems at all. And then from 1,000 to 1,100, I started getting a handful more times where the slide would always get caught on the disconnector, and just a handful where I had instances where the slide wouldn't lock back on the magazine, which are all Wilson Combat 47Ds. Now, I've been using these same exact magazines for all 1100 rounds, and it's only recently now that I started getting these issues. And so I'm really wondering if it's actually me just not cleaning the gun enough, as opposed to it suddenly falling apart or breaking. Because I'll switch to an overhead now, and you'll see that the parts, have wear on them, but there's nothing actually alarming, at least from what I can tell, but please correct me if I'm wrong. So we'll start by looking at the slide, and just in general for this overhead section, I'll talk a little less just so you can pay attention to what's on screen. But for the slide itself, the finish has held up quite nicely. There are just a couple spots from holster wear, but it's really nothing to pay attention to. But in terms of the exterior of the slide, or the top of the slide, everything is kept quite nicely, and the sights haven't come loose or anything like that. Now, if I flip over the slide, you will see there's definitely a lot more wear here, but it's also where the slide contacts the frame, so it shouldn't be too surprising. So again, I'm not sure if this is typical wear after 1100 rounds for a 1911, but you can see on the rails and also, just on the underbelly of the slide, there's definitely a lot more of that finish, which is worn off due to contact. You can also see some tooling marks as well on certain channels of the 1911, and of course, areas where there's a lot of, high friction and where the barrel is, of course, there's more wear there too. Now, looking at the extractor and the ejector, you will see that there's some wear here too, but nothing alarming, and I've looked more closely and there are no cracks or chips. And you'll notice this is a pretty common, thing for the other parts in the slide as well. One thing I have noticed for the slide stop is that there is an area here where the slide contacts the slide stop, where obviously there's friction and there's some wear, but it seems as though that the slide is creating some gashes in the slide stop. So just something to kind of keep in mind that I've noticed. Now, moving on to the slide, I think let's take a moment to appreciate the design and engineering of the 1911. There are some parts here which are staked on, but this is more or less one piece, and so just look at the precision and intricacies that go into making this. Very interesting and very cool. But with that being said, you'll notice here some of the wear marks, particularly around the slide stop, also around where more of the sear and disconnector and all those good parts are. You'll see there's some wear. And then also with the thumb safety as well, you can see some of that finish is worn off, as well as the grip safety. Now taking a look at some of the internals as well, you can see here that there's more wear, unsurprisingly, because of all the friction, but there are no chips or cracks. Here's just some more angles of what it looks like. One thing I will note about the thumb safety is that when it contacts the plunger, it's not really as stiff or as positive of a contact as I'd like. I'm never worried about the thumb safety accidentally engaging or disengaging, but I did take a Dremel to it anyway just to make that recess a little deeper, but it was never anything that actually caused me concern. One thing I will say in general too is that it's really interesting to see this design like the 1911 and all the different pieces, and how it progresses to simpler designs or at least fewer parts internally to something like a Glock. Now obviously the guns are different. You have a hammer-fired gun versus a striker-fired gun. But it's still very interesting to see the progression in technology and just admiring the machinery and the precision that goes into making these pieces. So hopefully this overhead section helped you out. Again, because my knowledge of the 1911 is a little more limited, hopefully by you seeing firsthand what the parts wear is like, you can kind of make decisions and draw conclusions of your own. So now that we've talked about durability, reliability, performance, and all that good stuff, let's talk about what I like about this gun. So it comes as no surprise is that I think just the 1911 in general looks great, it feels great, it handles great. There's something sexy about 45, testosterone levels always boost when you shoot it, and I think the finish on the gun and the way it's just designed overall, it's just exceptional. It's a real joy to shoot. Now specifically with the Tisas, obviously as I mentioned, the price point is very attractive. Initially I was skeptical of a $500 1911, but I've been pleasantly surprised, and I have found that my initial impressions have been aligned with the other reviews you've seen on the internet, which is overall positive. And now the biggest thing, of course, in terms of reliability, I know I mentioned those 10 kind of cycling issues, but if I consider that's less than 1% of the 1100 rounds, I would say overall for the price, the gun functions quite well, so I'm happy with that. But now let's segue to what I either don't like or more are cons. I genuinely feel like there are no actual cons of this gun yet. First, because I think overall it's performed well, but again, my perspective is a little limited. So some things that I want to pay attention to and understand more is just why those cycling issues are happening suddenly in the last, like 100 rounds or so. Again, I feel like that actually might just be my cleaning or lack thereof, but that's something that I want to understand more of before I can, really vouch for the gun more than I have already. The second thing I'd say, and this isn't necessarily a con, but for me, I'm still getting used to 45 as a caliber. As I mentioned before, I have noticed that I still flinch with this gun and I still blink when I shoot it, so I'm not fully used to the recoil yet. This is not a knock on the Tisas, but just my own perspective that I'm sharing with you. The next few things I'll put in the cons column, admittedly are not about the B45R or Tisas, it's more about just the 1911, so keep that in mind. The price of 45 is not the cheapest. Now, I don't think that should be a surprise to anyone though. You should always research and factor in the cost of ammunition before you buy the pistol. But even though the Tisas is cheap itself, the price of the ammo is not as cheap as 9mm, so that's still something to consider. But you should know this going in. I would also say for the 1911, obviously there's capacity. I purposely haven't touched on that much because again, I think it's something we all know by now that the 1911 doesn't have the best capacity out there. It's just another thing to consider when you're purchasing the gun. Why do you want the gun? Why, how do you plan to use it? And understanding its drawbacks and how you're going to get around that. I will add one more thing actually specifically for the Tisas is that the sights, they're fine. The three white dot sights or whatever you call them, and that's what I grew up using. That's what I'm very comfortable with. I would like to eventually change those to kind of more, like the amber front post and then, the blacked out rear or something like that, just because I find those to be easier to use. But the sights as they are stock from the factory are fine. It's just nothing good, nothing bad. They just are what they are. So in summary, what do I think about the gun? Would I recommend it? So if someone were to ask me that, here's how I would answer. Although I've only shot about 1,000 rounds so far and noticed some cycling issues that could be due to my lack of cleaning and familiarity with the gun, I think the overall performance and the price point of this gun make it something I would recommend. and I personally look forward to shooting it more to understand the the specific ins and outs of this particular 1911, and also just become more familiar with the 1911 and its caliber 45 more intimately. That's how I would answer that question. Yes, but given these caveats. I can't really compare it to any other 1911s. Again, the only other one I have is a M45A1 with 950 rounds through it. I don't have any guns that are considered to be like lower tier, and I don't have any guns that are considered to be higher tier. And so, unfortunately, I can't offer that perspective. I can only give you so much. But yeah, it's been very enjoyable. I really enjoy shooting it, although I am not used to 45 yet. There's something it has that allure. I just love shooting 45 as a caliber. And the 1911, it just feels so chunky and beefy, right? And so it's a great pistol to shoot, and I look forward to shooting it more than my Glock, honestly. Probably just because it's something new. But it's been a real pleasure to shoot so far, and I look forward to understanding what those malfunctions, what those hiccups are about. Just in general, Tisas, they do make this gun in, of course, 45 like this one. They make it in 9mm as well, both government and commander, the carry size too, which is pretty cool. And they've actually started to make a 1911 double stack. I think it's only 9mm, but it's in carry, so commander and government profile versions. I haven't bought one of those yet. Those are supposed to be $800 versus like the next one is probably the Springfield Prodigy at $1,500 is the next one. Maybe there's some others in between. For me personally, I need more trigger time on this B45R before I start to purchase more Tisas products. And while I know that this gun I have here that we've talked about today is not a 1911 double stack, it's the best frame of reference I have to understand how Tisas manufacturing and products would stack up. So that does it for this video, guys. If you have any questions, comments, or if you'd like me to address anything that I didn't talk about in this video, feel free to drop a comment. So I hope you guys enjoyed, hope you learned something, and I will catch you guys in the next one.